Introduction to Lean. Early in World War II, there was an American factory that produced the Air Force's B-25 bombers. Early on, near the start of the war, this factory produced one B-25 every 6 hours, which is equivalent to 360 minutes. However, by the end of the war, one bomber was rolling out of the factory every 60 seconds, which is just 1 minute. So this is a massive 360-fold improvement. But what happened? Obviously, the workers did not work 360 times harder, because that's simply not possible. Rather, the factory achieved this incredible improvement using the principles of a technique that we call Lean. Now, Lean is all about improving processes and eliminating waste. To help understand what waste is, let's first define the idea of value. So what is a value-added step? Well, that's something that meets 3 criteria. First of all, it's something that is important to the customer, or in the case of healthcare, the patient. It's something they would be willing to pay for if they had to. Second, it is something physical that is done. So in the case of a product, it's a physical transformation. For a patient, it's something like a treatment or consulting time with a provider. And third, it's something that is done right the first time, so that no rework is needed. Now, it's very important that we define value from the perspective of the customer, and in healthcare, that will always be the patient. Any step that does not meet all 3 of these criteria is considered a non-value added activity, or waste. It's safe to assume that, in general, at least half of all time and effort is wasted. Some even claim that up to 99% of time and effort is wasted. Now, I realize that's a very bold claim, but let's come back and look at this B-25 bomber example. Initially, they were building them in 360 minutes, but we know that they only require 1 minute. So that means there are 359 minutes of waste. And when we divide that by 360, we get 99.72% of all their time and activities are wasted. So now back to the idea that half of time and effort are wasted. Let's assume that this circle represents a standard work shift. Half of the time is spent doing value-added activities, and half the time is spent doing waste. Now, just note that this waste is not what people are intentionally wasting time. They think they're busy and they're doing activities, but it's not providing value to the patient. Now, the reality is that in a shift, you actually need to do more than just half of it in terms of value-added activity. So really, you need another slice of the pie here. And so your work looks like that. And ultimately, this ends up looking like a bulge, where you have this much work and still that same amount of waste. And this bulge represents overtime and stress and errors and rework that requires time in order to fix those errors. Now, the lean way is more like this. So we have our same shift here. Half the time is spent in value-added activities. Half of the time is spent in waste. But what we're going to do is identify the sources of waste, like this. And we're going to remove it. And we're going to replace that time with value-added activities. So now, our shift looks more like this, with all this value-added time and a much lower portion of it being spent on wasted activities. So ultimately, the purpose of Lean is to identify waste, remove it, replace it with value-added activities. So now you have more time for your patients. And that's an introduction to lean.